Hello and welcome back to another episode of Tash Teaches. I'm Tash, and in today's video I want to show you how you can create a random drum machine in Bitwig just using stock devices. This will allow you to, with the click of a button, completely generate an entirely new kit. Similar to something you might be able to do in, say, EXO or Atlas, but of course this is entirely Bitwig native, which makes it free if you have Bitwig, and also far more controllable because of the fact that the signal flow can be customized to your exact liking. I'm also going to show you how you can then set up with audio channels the outputs of this random drum machine to basically create sample packs and sample libraries for you, whether for your own use or to sell them yourself. And it allows you to go to the kitchen, make a sandwich while the computer just generates samples. So without further ado, let's jump right in and I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. First thing I'm going to do is go to my sample library of one-shots. And I'm going to find 128 of each specific sample category. So I want 128 kicks, claps, snares, and so forth. So I'm just going to select one of these kicks. And in fact, before I do that, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to change the view mode to the clip launcher that's horizontal. Not this view, and I can actually hide the timeline. And I don't need this MIDI channel. So let's just select a bunch of kicks. Bitwig doesn't let you select any more than 99 at a time. You'll see that this is what happens if you've selected too many. You just get a blue circle and it doesn't, or you just get a circle and it doesn't work. So you want to select less than 99 at a time. And I'm going to try and drop this on scene 1. But you can see that if I do just let go now, it's put every single one of those samples on its own channel. And I don't want that. I want for the kicks to be placed on individual scenes. So if you are on a Mac, you press and hold the Control button and you let go. Probably the Alt button on the PC, I'm not sure. But that's just going to put every single one on an individual scene. I'm going to press Command I to create another scene, and I'm going to select a few more kicks, just drag those in, 86 of them. The reason why I like doing it in this view is because A, I can see if any of the kicks just are totally wrong, like one's a loop or something. But I can also very easily, because of these scenes up here, see how many I've selected. So I can get rid of everything from 129 onwards, and we've now got 128 kick drums. Okay, cool. I'm going to pause the video while I find 128 toms, claps, snares, hats, and percussion, so forth, and I shall see you back here in a second. I've now got 128 kicks, toms, claps, snares, hats, and just percussion samples, and you can see that every single one of these cells is filled, which means we have an identical amount. The next thing I'm going to want to do is to make it so that they're all the same volume. And what I mean by this is if I were to go back over to this view, make it a little easier, if I were to trigger this kick, you can see that this kick is coming in at 0 dB. But let's say take this kick, and this is coming in at minus 1.7. Similarly with like the hats or the claps, like some of these guys, that's coming in at minus 11, whereas this one is coming in at minus 0.5. So we don't have much consistency between these samples. And since Bitwig 5.1, we now have the Normalize tool built in. So all I have to do is select any one of these and just make sure that I'm selecting with Shift click all of the samples. And I can right click now and do Normalize. And it will take a little bit of time, but you'll see that if I go a little bit further forward, if I undo and redo, you can see what it's done is it's turning up the things that are too quiet. And it now means that if I look at, say, this sample, you can see that this has been turned up 5 dB. If I undo, it was at 0 dB, and it's now been turned up to 5, minus 5. And you can see that if I do now play it, it's peaking at 0. Every single sound is coming in at 0. For some reason, this snare isn't. Let's just make sure that these are all also done. Okay, now they are 0. Lovely. Okay, so what I want to do now is take all of these samples on the kick channel and I'm going to put them into a multisampler. I'm going to do that by clicking on the first, pressing Command A to highlight everything on the channel. And then I'm going to right click and do Slice to Multisample. Now I want to make sure if this isn't already on audio event that the slice at is set to audio event because there are 128 clips or audio events in here and that's going to give us 128 slices. We don't necessarily need to bounce it. We could just slice it raw, but I'm going to go ahead. Actually, no, we do want to bounce because of the fact that we would like for the increases and decreases in volume of that normalization to be baked into it. So let's just click OK. And it's going to take a second. But we now have a sampler that if I were to play on my keyboard, every single note on the keyboard is giving me a different kick drum, which is cool and all, but that's not really what I'm looking for. I would like to map this select knob to be the controller. So the way that we're going to do that is by double-clicking on the multi-sample itself, and then we're going to open up the editor mode, this editor window here, and we're going to highlight every single one of these kicks. And on the first sample, the lowest note, on its right-hand side, I'm just going to stretch that out all the way to the far right. And then for the highest note sample, on its left side, I'm going to stretch that all the way to the left. Now that just means that if I were to play a note, it's playing everything all at once. And I know it's only showing 8-ish of them there. That's probably got something to do with the voices. But again, we're not looking for every kick to be played at once. So now we're going to go to this little star icon, and nothing is there. But if I now right-click and distribute select equally, we have what we did have before across the keyboard, now mapped to select, which means that it doesn't matter what note I play, playing all up and down the keyboard here, it's only when I twist this knob that I can get a different sound. So let's just whack that up for a second. Cool. Now, what I also like to do is save this as a multi-sample preset. So I'm just going to, inside here, click Save, and I'm going to call this Kick, let's maybe not do it in caps, Kick Collection 1. And I'll call it 1 because maybe we want to add more in the future. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and do that with every single other one of these sounds. First, maybe I'll just do Tom so that we can watch it together. One more time, I'll do it a bit quicker. I'm going to right-click, slice to multi-sample, click OK. Once it's done, I'm going to go onto the sampler, open up this view, highlight every sound, make it take up the entirety of the keyboard, go to our select view. You don't actually need to click that. This will work the same. It just means that we can then see it. So let's save this, and we'll call this Tom Collection 1, and OK. We can close, and we can now delete this audio file and the sampler. I'm going to pause the video now, and I'm going to do it for the rest of the sounds, and I will be back with you in a second. That wraps it up for the last one, which is the percussion collection, which means I can get rid of both of these now. And if I were to search for collection, you can now see that I've got a multi-sample. This isn't an instrument. This is the part that goes inside of a sampler that will then allow that select to work. So even if I select any one of these, say perk, and I was now play this, I can skip through, and that's just built in. Very nice. Next, I want to make a drum machine. And I'm going to do just one of these cells first. We're just going to do it with the kick. And then I'm going to show you how very easily we can copy and paste across the settings, so we don't have to waste our entire day here. But I'm just going to press plus, and I'm going to search for kick collection, make sure I'm searching for everything, and there it is. And let's also just put in a note here. It doesn't matter what note we're using because of the fact, oh, where are we? Because of the fact, are we on the wrong note? Right, it does absolutely matter what note we're using. Okay, lovely. So now that we've got that triggering the kick, I want to set up a few macros on this sampler itself so that I can have control of a variety of parameters that don't go outside of the range of usefulness. If any of you have watched my video on the automation trick you wish you knew sooner, I'll link it up above in the video now. I talk about minimums and maximums, and I firmly believe that there is no point allowing yourself the ability to automate or modulate anything outside of the range of it being useful. That's just a waste of resolution of a knob, it's a waste of your time, and frankly, it's just finicky. Like, oh, don't make the knob go past that. Just set it up ahead of time. So I'm going to open up in this kick collection, the modulator section. I'm going to take a macro, and I'm going to use this macro first and foremost to do something with the pitch. So I'm going to put this on bipolar because I would like to be able to turn the kick up in pitch by an octave and the kick down by an octave. So if we press play, now that's not mapping just the whole pitch knob, because then I could go up way too high and way too low. In fact, maybe let's do 24 semitones. Nah, 12 is good. Next, I don't want forever, if I find like a long kick here. Okay, that's fairly long. I don't want for my kick, regardless of the length, so if I were to shorten this, I'd like for the length decision to be dictated by the decay knob. And the only reason we're having that full sound is because I had the release on, and I don't really care for that. I want for the release to be up max, and we're going to bring the sustain down to 0, and the length of the kick will be decided by the decay. And like we did with the pitch, I don't need for the decay knob to be able to go all the way down to 10. That's too low for me, too short. And I also don't need a 10-second decay. That's way too long. So I'm going to find an area which feels suitable. I usually find, you can see from about 10 downwards, we probably don't need any more than about 2, because past 2 seconds, or maybe even like 1.5, past that, it's sort of negligible how much more we're adding, and I don't really like having super long kicks anyway. So position-wise, it's about, I don't know, just 2:30 p.m. on the clock. As far as too short goes, I definitely don't need 10 milliseconds, that's way too little. Let's select a different kick. And I probably don't need to go much lower than about, say, 75. So let's take another macro now, and I'm going to whack that up to full so that I'm actually hearing what I'm doing. And as I modulate this up, let's just set it to a little bit before 3 p.m. that is. And you can now see that I have a knob that goes from a good appropriate short to a good and appropriate long. I'd also like to do this with a filter. So let's find something that's a bit brighter. Okay, that's a perfect example. I'd like to have a filter so that I can get rid of some of that annoying top end. So first I'm just going to put on the filter, and then I'm going to take another macro, and I'm going to find my lowest value. So let's find, for a kick, I think it's probably going to be about 100. I don't think we need to go too much lower than that. And I'm just going to whack this up to full, and I'm going to bring it up to its good highest value, which is probably again around 3 p.m. What does that end up being? Yeah, let's whack it up a little bit more. Nice. One thing I find though is with a filter, particularly on a kick or a tom or something that's bassy, is that having it just down like this doesn't sound very good. I like to have a bit of an envelope pushing that open. So I'm going to take an ADSR as well. I'm going to bring the attack down to 0, sustain down to 0, release doesn't matter, and I'll bring this decay maybe down a little bit. And I'm going to use this to open up the filter. So let's whack it up to about 3 p.m. as well. And you can now see that even though I have this filter down here, if I turn this off, we're not getting that just muddy, annoying thud. We're still getting the kick, but it sounds quite different to this. And that difference is because we have a tightness. And I could make this really quite short, actually. But the thing is, I don't want for when I start getting up here for the envelope to be pushing us up all the way to the top. So I'm also going to use this knob down here to, when this is up, i.e. when the filter frequency is higher, to make the amount that this envelope is affecting that less. So all I have to do is just do this. I'm going to map that down 100%. So at its top, you can see that we're getting a real bang. That blue is coming up quite a lot. But as I start to increase, we're getting very little of that movement, just a very little bit. And that just means that one knob doesn't just make it more filtered and dark, but it makes it more filtered and dark and punchy. So we have the best of both worlds there, really. And you can fiddle with the controls here, find something a little bit more suited to you. But I think that's a really nice way of adding just a little bit of character to that sound without having to remove too much from it. Okay, nice. Now we've got these set up, we need to move on to the next aspect of this, and that is the ability to have these random dice tosses, these throws, change the parameters on here. And I'm going to do that with a Polygrid. And I'm going to put that still on this drum machine, but I'm going to put it just before the kick collection. And I'm going to drag the kick collection sampler into the effects box here. And then I'm going to open up, I can get rid of these two modulators, I'm going to open up the grid and I'm going to delete everything inside here. Now, there's a few things that we're going to need in order to create our dice toss thrower randomized generator thingamajigger, and those are going to be a button. We're going to need a logic delay. We're going to need an XOR, And we're of course going to need a modulator out because we've put this kick collection into the effects. This means that by modulating anything in here, we're actually able to control things on the drum machine that's outside of it, but technically it's not because it's in the effects slot. So the way that we're going to do this is by going to first the logic delay. We're going to delay the entire signal, which is the option on the right. We're going to change it to something around 7.5 milliseconds. Just want to take a quick moment to shout out to whoever it was on the Bitwig Gridwig Discord page. I think his name was like Goethe or something, and he came up with this incredibly simple solution to the dice throw. I had been operating in a sort of state of mild irritation for reasons that I probably don't need to go into right now. But anyways, thank you to you. Got told, that was his name. Anyways, I'm going to take the output of this logic delay into the first input of the XOR, and then I'm going to take the output of the button also into the bottom input of the XOR. Now, the reason why we had to do this is because of the fact that now when I press this button, whether it's turning it on or turning it off, we're getting a trigger signal. If it was just a button, then we would just get an on state or an off state. And you may be saying, okay, well, why don't you just use a trig? Because this trigger will do exactly the same thing. You can see here that the trigger gives us that situation. And the reason why is because you can't actually map anything to the trigger. I can map a button to control this, and I can map a button to control a button. So let me just undo what I've done here. I can map a button to control a button, but using the trigger, unfortunately, we're not able to get a signal from outside the grid and modulate anything in, which would make for a useless randomized drum machine, as you'll see. So very cool. Let's now also take a dice, because the trigger of either turning this on or off is then going to roll that dice. And just for the sake of visualizing that, every time I press this, we're getting a different held random value. Cool. So now let's take the output of this dice and put it into a modulator out. And I'm now going to take the modulator out. And if we bring this select down to 0 on this kick, I'm going to take the output of this and I'm going to map that all the way up on the select knob, which means that when I press play, if I were to press this button now, we can, on every press, get a different kick. And of course, because we've mapped it outside of here, in fact, everything can be closed and we can just randomly select a different kick drum without having to have the grid open. Very nice. We can also go in, and if we just rename this button so that we know what it is, we'll call that sample, and we might as well call this sample as well. Let's now copy and paste this down. I'm going to take another button and just copy and paste this down a few times. It's not what I'm looking for, really. There we go. So I'm going to copy and paste this down. This next one is going to control our pitch. So let's just call that pitch. We'll call this one decay. And then finally, we've got a filter here. So let's bring our pitch knob to 100%. There we go. I'm going to make the dice for the pitch bipolar, just because then that means that we can get values above and below 0 semitones. Now we've got decay. So let's just bring this all the way down to nothing and whack it all the way up to the top. And finally, filter. Let's do the same thing. We now have the ability to generate a different filter frequency with a button press. We can do decay, we can do pitch, and we can do sample. So let's take some more buttons on the outside of here, and we're going to put that onto pitch. Let's do another button. Suppose I could just copy and paste it. And we'll do decay and filter. Let's name these appropriately. This is our pitch randomized button. This is our decay button. And finally, we have our filter. And I'd like to go one step further and actually just move perhaps all of these over here. I'm going to take another button, and this button will control all of them. So you guessed it, this one's going to be called all. Now if I turn this on, we're getting different kick, different decay length, different filter frequency, and different pitch. But of course, if we do like a sound and we want to see what we could do other than that, maybe I like this sound, but I just want a different pitch, we can play around with that, or maybe just a different filter, or a different decay, or all. Very nice. Okay, so now that we've got that set up, why don't we also now, out of here, I'm going to create a modulator section, and I'm going to take a button, and I'm going to use, actually we could probably do it with a remote control, you know. Let's go to add new page. I'm going to go to my MIDI mapping here, and I'm going to select this all button. So now that means I can just, from here, generate it. I just want to test something quickly to see if this works. Okay, so that's why I had a hunch. Let's get rid of this remote control, and we are going to do it with a macro, because that would have actually made us have to do more work. We're not about that. Cool. So instead of using the remote control, we're going to take a button macro, and we're going to map this button to all. And we're going to call it all. Then we're going to take a few more buttons. Let's just get them ready for ourselves. This is going to do sample. This is going to do pitch, decay, and filter. So let's call this sample. Let's call this pitch. This is decay, and this is filter. Nice. So if everything is closed, we are able to now still do our sort of random generation stuff without having to dive down into the setup itself. Cool. Now, because we've done that ahead of time, if I now rename this to kick, we're not going to have to do any more of that mapping again. The only thing we're going to have to now do is switch out which multisample this machine is working on. So I'm going to copy and paste this across, and I'm going to name this Tom1. And on this one, I'm now going to open up the effects box, and I'm going to right-click, clear, and now I can browse new multisamples. So I'm going to search for Tom collection, and there it is. If I were to now put in some sort of MIDI note for that Tom, I can now press all, and that's giving us fantastic random values across everything all at once. Now let's take this to the side, and I'm just going to call this Tom2 because it's probably quite nice to have a little bit of variation there. Maybe I'll also add a bit of recurrence so that this only happens on the first of 4 steps. Maybe we'll do a double kick as well on the first of every 4. And let's press play. Very nice. Now I'm going to copy and paste this across again, and I'm going to put a clap in, and I can open this guy up and do clear, browse multi-samples, and I'll do clap collection. And because it works exactly the same, I'm just going to pause the video, go ahead and put in all of the rest of the sounds that I want to use and demonstrate here. I now have a kick, I have 2 toms, I have clap, I've got snare, 2 hats, and this is a, let's just call this perk. Now let's go in and just make a little clip for ourselves here. We're going to have a clap, we can have some sort of cool snare fill that only happens on the every 2. And maybe we'll also have a snare. I'll have a little snare here. Bring the velocity down a bit. Can be quite nice to layer the snare and the clap. Now we've got 2 hats. So I'm going to put an offbeat hat. And then I'm also going to make some sort of 16th note hat. If you just hold Option and drag to the right, you can fill up every square. And that just means that if we now play with the velocity of these guys, what's going on here? Just bring these down a little bit. We don't need those to be so loud. And I'm also just going to add a little bit of chance to how much these play. So let's do 59% of the time they play. So if we were to listen now, doesn't necessarily sound great, but we can of course just generate an entirely new pattern. Ooh, that one's really cool. So let's do something with this percussion layer as well. I'm going to put in something here. Probably turn this up a bit. I want that to happen on the first of every 8. And then I'll copy and paste this across. And I want these to happen instead of on the first, on the 4th of every 8. So let's take a quick listen. And in fact, maybe also we don't want the kick to play on the last of every 8. And when that does happen, maybe let's do a double clap. So that can happen on the last of every 8. Take a quick listen. We're almost at that one with the double 8.
Super cool. So now we can just generate entirely new patterns with a button. And if, say, we like the sounds of something, so in this case, we like that, maybe we just want different decay. And that's gonna give us a few more variations of the same sort of timbre. That's really cool. We could do pitch. Oh, really nice. Also, because it's in a drum machine, we can very easily affect these individual layers. I'm going to go ahead and, in fact, just close up all of these tracks because we don't really even need to see them anymore. Everything is all hardwired. And when we save this as a preset, it would be quite nice not to have to be faced with all of this unnecessary visuals. In fact, I probably could even close the modulators if I need to see that either. But yeah, because it's on a drum rack, it's very easy then for you to put all your notes in on just a single channel, but then also very easily mix them. So one thing I do like to recommend is that because we've normalized all of these sounds, if I were to just duplicate this down here and I were to put all of these to max velocity, and I were to press play, you'll see that none of these actually clip. For some reason this has, which is a bit weird. But regardless, doesn't really matter. Because they're all basically now normalized, what this means is that if everything were at max velocity, they're all going to be peaking at 0. But altogether, that's now definitely going to be clipping. So I tend to like to sort of pre-mix these drum machines. And what I mean by that is the way that I mix music most of the time is I use the rule of 6. Which is that I only ever tend to have things at a peak value of a multiple of 6. So it's either going to be -6, -12, -18, -24, and so forth. And because I make house music most of the time, a kick drum is always going to be my loudest element. And I don't tend to ever make anything go louder than -6. So if I go into this kick here, in fact, I don't even need to go into it. Let's just make it even easier here. I can just put a tool on there, and I'm going to bring the output of this down -6. Which means that even at its max volume, we're never going to be going above -6. On the toms, I can just copy and paste it across like this. On the toms, I don't like to go too much above -12. I can copy and paste that onto both of the tom channels. And then on the clap, I also like to do -12. In fact, let's do -18 for the clap. And then we'll go to the snare. I'm going to do the same thing, -18. And then for the first hat, I'll do -18. And then for hat 2, which is my 16th note hat, I'm going to do that at -24. And then my perk, I'll do that at -18 as well. And that means that if everything were at max velocity, maybe the clap could be -12. I quite liked it at -18. But anyways, that just means that if everything is at max velocity, it's already sort of where I want it to be. Which means that when I'm using one of my controllers like this, when everything is at max, I'm not having to like bring things down so as to make them not too loud. Like at max value is the loudest I would need it to be. So, you know, that's optional, but I like to just bake that in there just to make it so that everything is, of course, just set up ahead of time. So now, of course, super cool. And you can get some really funky situations here because of that pitch modulation, the filter, and the decay. Like, it's not just giving you different sample sounds. It's giving you different combinations that you wouldn't necessarily get without really fucking with the pitch on some of these. So, and I'm just obviously using the same MIDI pattern over and over again, but super cool. So we can now save this, and let's actually close it up. So this is just what it looks like. We can save preset to library, and we're going to call this Random Drum Machine. Lovely. Now, I just want to quickly draw your attention. We don't need to do it for every single one of these sounds, but every single one of these was called Collection 1. We had Kick Collection 1, Tom 1, and all that kind of jazz. If you wanted to, you could go in here and let's go down, let's borrow down a little bit more. Say I had another kick collection. So let's just say I haven't got another one made here. But what I could do is, instead of just using this sampler that has the kick in it, if I were to group this, I could then add another collection. So let's in fact just duplicate this down, and let's pretend that this is kick collection 2. And I would do that by clearing browse multisample collection, and I would pick kick collection 2, which we don't have, but say we put it in there. Let's do it like this. So at least pretends. We now could change this instrument layer, because obviously both of these kicks are playing at once, which is a little too, well, we don't need that, especially if we had 2 individual banks of kicks. I can now change this layer to an instrument selector, which means that only by skipping down do we change to the other collection. If we went back into the polygrid, we could then go and probably stretch out this sample. We don't need to make an entirely new one. But what we could do is take another dice and another modulator, and we're going to use the output of this modulator to come down on here, which means that you'll notice that if I were to press play now, actually I guess we need to go up, not down. Yeah, so now not only do we get a different random sample with the select knob, but it's also picking which bank is playing. So we could even just call these banks, so to speak. I don't necessarily think it's worth having a separate bank knob, because really by having just sample and that controlling the select and which bank that we're playing, that's just increasing the amount of possibilities. So, you know, if you only have 128 kick drums and 128 claps and hats and whatever, it's not like you're going to be getting completely repeated combinations of sounds, but the likelihood of that happening just gets exponentially less the more banks you have. So it's definitely worth considering if you're going to be copying what I've made here today. I'm not going to draw it out and make this video any longer than it needs to be, but you can absolutely create more banks, and I would highly recommend doing so.
If you'd like to save yourself some precious time and get playing around with this project without having to build it yourself, then you can actually download the project file from the link in the description in exchange for an email. I know, bargain.
The final thing that I'd like to say about this is that it's all well and good having this MIDI generation machine, but a lot of you will know that I am obsessed with audio and dealing with things in the audio realm. So I would like to create a setup where I can just record the audio direct out. So let's take this blank audio channel. I'm going to burrow down into the drum machine chains, and I'm going to click kick post. So let's call that kick. Now if I press record enable, even if we have no output on this drum machine, we're hearing that kick. And of course, randomly generating things is going to give us different kick patterns, and you can see that it's actually recording those different kicks in here, which is just bloody wonderful. So I'm just going to go ahead and pause the video, and I'm going to make 7 more channels here and set up the outputs for the random drum machine, and I shall see you in a second. All 8 now have their own individual channel, and so long as I record enable these guys, which now in Bitwig we're able to do all at once, thank God. Oh, crikey, brilliant. I can now press play, and you can see that every single one of these channels is registering its own individual layer. So if I were to just start recording in this view, very nice. And that's just created a cool random drum setup for us without us necessarily having to do too much more than just press a random button. Now, I've talked about this before in a video where I was talking about a random top loop generator. And this can be particularly handy for creating sample packs. So what I'd like to show you now is how you can sort of just set it and forget it and just automate, say, 100 combinations being recorded, because then the ones that you do like, you can just chuck them in a folder and it's your own custom sample pack ready to be used. The ones you don't like, you can delete, obviously, but it does mean that instead of just having like one top loop, you then have these rather nifty little combinations of sounds, so that you don't just have the control of having the loop in or out, but when you then go to make a track with these combinations in your personal sample pack, you're then able to really be quite granular with what you're doing with them, and at times maybe replace a clap. So what we're going to do is go down here to the, which one is it? It's this guy, the page, the project panel. And we're going to go and take post-recording action, and we're going to put that to record into next free slot. And obviously the amount of time that we want for this to happen, seeing as this was a 1-bar clip and we had 8 bars of recurrence, so this doesn't happen on the 8th bar, I want to say post-record delay 8. In actual fact, I would do that if I were really doing this, but I don't want to waste anyone's time, so I'm just going to leave it at 1 bar. We don't need to do 8 because it will take longer. But that means if I were to just click record now, you'll see that what happens is that when it's finished recording, it just goes into the next slot. And what's quite cool about this is that it will go into, if I only make there to be 3 scenes, if I were to press record, you'll see that once it gets to the end, it just stops recording, and that's it. So we can be very specific with how many sample sets we'd like to generate. And this is just obviously a fantastic way of coming up with cool patterns and being able to almost just go and make a sandwich while the computer comes up with some cool patterns for you. Right, okay, so what we're also wanting to do here is, I think, have it so that not only are we just recording into the next scene, but every single time we're getting a different random value. So what we could do is have maybe on the project panel, or even just on the channel itself, the random drum machine, I'm going to take a step sequencer. And I'm going to make this step sequencer 1 bar long, and I'm going to delete everything off of here except for the first step. And I'm now going to map that to the all, which means that every time I press play... Oh, I need to make it only 1 step, of course. 1 bar. Okay, yeah, nice. So now this just means that every single time we're getting a different set of clips. So this means that all I have to do now is just click record. And one thing that I would also maybe recommend that could be quite fun is to put perhaps, say, everything but the kick into a group. In fact, let's take out the toms and we'll just do these guys. If I put them into a group, I can still operate in exactly the same way. So let's put these on, but I could call this top, which means I can make another audio channel outside here, and I could take the output of top, and this means that we are then just recording also a top loop layer. Let's set that on to record. We might as well make all of these red to placate the demons in my mind. And yeah, let's just go ahead and click record, and let's do, say, 5 scenes, and we'll just see what it comes up with. And we want to do this, so just make sure that every single one of these is ready to be recorded. How very curious. Maybe, it's not visualizing it for me. I guess it does work, but there's a bug there. So let's see. Yeah, there we go. So if I just delete this, I'm going to press record, and let's just create 5 scenes of randomized drums. Very nice. And you can see how wonderful this is as an approach to coming up with things, because you're not having to sit there and find things yourself. Instead, you're allowing the computer to just say, what about this? What about this? What about this? And any one of them that you like, say, for example, I really like this one. I did actually quite like that one. I now have not just the individual stems, but I've also just got a top here. And it's created these top loops, and it's just wonderful.
Well, folks, that's sadly all we have time for today, but I do hope that this video was useful. If you enjoyed it, then please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and smash that notifications bell too if you'd like to keep up to date with all of my future videos. In the meantime, happy Monday and happy creating.